Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was January 20th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcora Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document is the first instance, according to the historian Jaume Riera-Isans, that we see Jaume, the son of Joan and Violant, referred to as the Dauphin. And this is something that I've spoken about a couple different times on the podcast already. The introduction of the term Dauphin into the Crown of Aragon. That introduction is carried out by Joan and Violant when they are at the outset of their reign. One of the first things they do as they're getting the government together on January 16th in Granollers, they formally name the heir to the throne after Joan, which is the 3-year-old boy, Jaume. They formally name him a Dauphin, and they adjust that into Catalan as a Dalfi, D-A-L-F-I. This move is one that I think is an illustrative example of the enthusiasm with which Joan imported French culture into the Crown of Aragon. This is something that I myself have written about in an article that is available on the website for the journal Quidditas. And in that article, which I titled Medieval Hypebeast, the Conspicuous Consumption of Joan I of Aragon, I go through and look at all these different ways that throughout his time as Duke of Girona and during his reign as King of the Crown of Aragon, Joan, as a cooperative project with Violant, they brought in whatever kind of hot cultural trends they could from France into the Crown of Aragon. And in a previous episode, I mentioned how French culture was kind of like at the level of what we would think of as Hollywood cultural production in our world in the 21st century, where it's just seen as the cutting edge in terms of what is really popular and also artistically supported with a lot of resources, so that you're kind of in this sort of self-perpetuating cycle where it's seen as the place to go to make great cultural products. I'm talking about movies and TV series. Not the only place to go, but it just has that power of having built up a reputation as the source for cultural production. And so it's not like it's the only place where great culture is made. It's just that it has that kind of attraction, that kind of cachet. And so same deal with southern France at this time. There was a culture of troubadour performance in Toulouse that was extremely innovative and then spread throughout all of Provence and southern France And a lot of those troubadours interacted with troubadours who would travel around the Crown of Aragon. And so Joan, at a very young age, he heard about what they were doing, and basically this started a lifelong project of wanting to be in on the latest fashions, which is where kind of the hype beast connection comes from, like really going after what's trendy is what I see the behavior as here, and having a real craving for getting the stuff that has the best reputation for being cutting edge fashion. And so we see this a lot with the literature and the music. We see a bunch of letters that a lot of scholars have already written about where Joan and Violant are trying to get the latest copy of the Guillaume Machaut manuscripts, for example. So that is all to explain the presence of the phrase Mon car fi l'Odolphe de Girona in the fourth line of this letter from Violant. But who is this letter to? Well, the letter starts molt car cosi. Got all the molt cars happening again. Who's the cousin? The cousin is the brand new King of Navarre. Navarre is the kingdom to the north of the Crown of Aragon. And in a remarkable coincidence, Charles III ascended to the throne, inherited the throne, on January 1st of 1387. Charles II had died. And so in this really remarkable coincidence, both Violant and Joan and Charles III of Navarre, they all become the rulers of their kingdoms like right around the same time. And this really plays into this concept that I've toyed around with a little bit since starting this project, that there's a team next gen happening here. A real sense of the next generation is now coming into its own. And some of the stuff, especially like the warmongering that was going on, both from Charles II of Navarre and also Pere the Ceremonious in the Crown of Aragon and Pedro the Cruel in Castile, that generation has concluded. And now Team Next Gen is coming in and they want to do a bit of a reset. It's one that is a cooperative project between the ruler of Navarre, King Charles III, and Violant and Joan, because these folks are buddies. And I have a theory. It's not something I can substantiate in any of the literature yet, but I have a theory that Violant and Charles, they knew each other and hung out in the years 1378 and 1379 in Paris, because as prince, the future Charles III had been sent by his father to go do some diplomacy with France, but then his father did some kind of like shady move and like did an attack somewhere, and the King of France was like mad. Charles V was like, what are you doing? Like, you're basically like trying to trick me. And so he made Charles the prince a hostage. So the future King of Navarre was a hostage in Paris at the time that Violant was there, and in the months that Violant was finding out that she was going to be marrying into the royal family of the Crown of Aragon and heading to Iberia. And so she might have sought out Charles to kind of get the lowdown on what it's like to be on the other side of the Pyrenees. And I have a feeling they knew each other in France. Eventually, Prince Charles gets released from captivity in Paris and goes back to Navarre. And then in the time that Charles is waiting for his father to die so he can become Charles III, and in the time that Joan is waiting for Pere to die so that he can become King of the Crown of Aragon, there were regular visits between the Prince of Navarre and Joan and Violant. And we know that they were buddies because of an extraordinary letter from May of 1386. This letter has surfaced earlier in the scholarship, but Dawn Bratch Prince has written about it in a way that I think really brings it out a lot more in its meanings. This letter is one that Violant wrote to, at the time, Prince Charles of Navarre. And she says, and I'm doing a faithful paraphrase here, but once you hear this, you're just going to have to rewind and be like, what? Violant writes to Charles, and this is what she says. You and I danced so hard that I had a miscarriage. Not only that, but the child that I had in my womb was one that I was going to name after you. Okay, so there's just a lot to really figure out what's going on there. First of all, they had a great time dancing together, that's for sure. To the extent that Violant can come to the conclusion that it was the hard dancing that led to her miscarriage. So we know that they were getting along, having a good time. That was a real moltkar kosi there. But then there's this statement about the miscarriage. It's a tremendous, tremendous problem as a royal family member for a woman to have a miscarriage. I mean, it would be in all kinds of cases, not to minimize the miscarriage experience at all. But for women who were in these elite positions, the potential of having a child, especially a male child, was very tied to the opportunity to increase their own power, their own stature, the stature of their husband, because so much was invested in producing an heir. And so to have a miscarriage is something that is a very, very sensitive, even beyond whatever you could put as the baseline of sensitivity and trauma of having a miscarriage. And so when Violant says, I was going to name that baby after you, is she trying to make Charles feel bad for how hard he was dancing with her? Or is this actually a level of irony that Violant is sending off to Charles as a kind of I'm not going to hold it against you, even though I'm saying that I'm holding it against you? Yeah, it's really hard to untangle the meaning behind that letter of 1386. But look at what we have here in the following year, a letter that is really gushing with affection. She's writing to the King of Navarre with just moltkar, karkosi, all throughout. I mean, this is one of the most gushy letters that I've ever seen. And so the affection that Violant has for Charles III, King of Navarre, is, I think, pretty much confirmed in this letter. So what to make of the kind of message that appeared, in the prior year, May of the prior year, about their interaction? That is something that actually I hope I'm going to be able to talk about in a bonus episode of the podcast when I get to have an interview with one of my classmates here in the graduate program at the University of New Mexico, Katie Despo, who specializes in studying medieval pregnancy in the late Middle Ages. So we'll see if we get to have that happen. I hope so. All right, that is today's document and just a whole lot of background information about it. Oh, one last detail. I wanted to specify how Charles III, King of Navarre, and Violant are related, because they are cousins. So Charles is the son of Violant's mother's sister. So that is how they're related, because Charles III's father, Charles II, married a daughter of the French king, and that's how they're cousins. Because same thing with Violant. Her father, Robert de Bar, married another daughter of the French king. Okay, hopefully that isn't super confusing. I think it might be time for like a family tree, if I can try to find one and put it on the website. All right, that does it for today's episode. Thanks for listening to this latest installment of the Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Moltcara Compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I have done my job. Remember, the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.